In this series, Finding Yourself in Transition, as I said, the focus is on seeing how the shifting and the changing that are accelerated now in almost everyone's life, if not everyone's life on Earth, somehow that provides how that may be providing us the opportunity to awaken. It's easy to look backward and see how circumstances shifting and changing rather radically, certain avenues of financial support disappearing, death of a spouse or loved one, has eventually been the space in which something new and very valuable has emerged. It's while we're in it that it seems less clear. And since it's accelerated now, these changes, it seems valuable to consider the possibility that we can learn to be this stillness in which all this shifting is happening, and not just rise up on top of it and put an affirmation over it and say, oh, everything's in divine order, it's all wonderful. I mean, we wouldn't say that to someone who just underwent a deep emotional loss. But to value and appreciate the process as well that individuals undergo when these changes, these shifts, these losses occur. Another fundamental understanding that we all already have, but we don't necessarily remember that we have, is that consciousness is everything. State of consciousness is everything. The so-called world of our experience is always moving and changing to reflect certain previously cherished beliefs being pulled away so that new, deeper realizations can occur. So there's not really much possibility for human beings who mostly have been conditioned to believe that they're little, tiny, limited, wounded selves, or some of us may even have been conditioned to think we're very special selves. For those beliefs have to be removed in order for this more fundamental truth to emerge. So I think it would be a little childlike of us to think that profound spiritual awakening is really going to occur without some periods of unsettledness. And we want to learn how to be present to each other when these things occur. In this ministry, I came here not very far on the heels of the death of the minister, my assistant's husband. Your spiritual leader met many of you. And he was ill for a long time, so there were losses and changes going on for some time prior to the death. And to not really look at that and try to sense where that places us in process is not to appreciate part of reality. Not eternal reality, but our experience. So if a new state of consciousness, a new earth, to borrow again, as you will notice, I often borrow that term that Eckhart borrowed from Christian scripture, a new heaven and a new earth. If a new earth is to emerge, an old earth is going to have to get out of the way. And as humans, we don't relinquish the old earth all that easily. And it can be painful. There can be shock. There can be grief. There can be an unsettledness. And somehow or another, we're going to have to learn as mature beings to be present to that too, and allow it to be. "18 months ago, I sat on a park bench in Vancouver, BC, and a voice said, "It's time to go now." I was at the point of I'm not any great success, never have been materially, but I was at the point of my greatest success in spiritual work at that moment. I was the spiritual leader of another church, and it was prospering, and, we had $1 million worth of property that was paid for, an integrous board, good participation. We'd gone pretty deeply together, and yet here's this voice that's saying it's time to go. And you know as well as I do, when that voice speaks, you can't really do anything else. Here we are 18 months later. I don't have the job I once had. I don't even have contact with 99% of the individuals I served constantly, and I want to focus on me. This is just an example. This is not about me. It's just an example. Just before I came here, my car started sort of doing sputtery things, so I have another car. I have another home 2 doors down from here. I live in another city. I have another job. And really, my closest friends, I rarely have time to talk to. The entire world that I knew 18 months ago pretty much went poof. I think there are parts of me that are rattled by it. Probably I haven't even sensed and felt it all yet. Now, people look at me because you're not used to me yet, so these tears are not about that. I just cry. I leak. I'm not up here sad this morning. I'm up here experiencing a profound awe and wonderment at how this source can function, how it can take stuff away and replace it with better stuff and new stuff that's more appropriate to the new stage. And how I've been graced to be supported and sustained and allowed to stay relatively balanced and stable and strong and encouraged through it. But for your sake and mine, I partly want to talk about this morning how the need to be present to whatever enters the world of form. Sadness, shock, pain, and the most cast out of human emotions, anger. I heard of someone that had a loss this week that then I didn't even talk to him, but I heard they had some anger. We make anger wrong. But anger is just an emotion. Actually, it's a separating emotion that separates us from our own sadness in a way that we're not ready to feel yet. So it's a stage that has to be honored. Anger's okay. As we grow, we hopefully do not project responsibility for our anger onto someone else, but to feel it is a human experience for everyone. So when I talked in the meditation this morning about the flower of forgiveness, I'm really kind of talking about how do we allow these things to be without making them wrong. Forgive means to give one thing for another. And what it really most deeply means is instead of judging something, we love it as it is. Not love in the human, attachy, sticky, controlling way, but just love that allows it to be as it is. This love that shines out of the still, silent dimension is always here. And when I teach on Wednesday night that it might be a good idea for us to become acquainted with what I call the heart, the spiritual heart, all I'm really saying is this is an entry point in which we may be able to access and allow this love to emerge into our awareness. So all of a sudden, we're looking with merciful eyes on whatever it is that arises in our experience, whether it's something that appears to be somebody else. There are no others. We're one. Or it appears to be thoughts and feelings and emotions that are emerging from within the so-called me. So this honoring of process is going to be critical. We are talking about finding yourself in transition based on a book by Robert Brummett, who is attempting to bring together and and weave together both the absolute or spiritual reality as well as the psychological, more relative process, describing a transition as always beginning with an ending, followed by a void, and then a new beginning. Well, we do fine with the new beginnings, but we humans would like to hurry up and get to the new beginning. And really the new beginning occurs more easily, more readily, and more fully if we don't hurry or try to control the process and jump to it. If we allow this ending to be, with its feelings and its thoughts and its process. Jane came by my apartment the other day and saw this sculpture sitting on the mantelpiece above the fireplace next door, and she said, "You ought to do a lesson on it sometime." I'm not going to do a whole lesson on it, but I brought it in to honor her request, and I'll tell you what it says, what it's depicting and where it comes from briefly. You can come by and look at it later if you like. It's a Native American shaman. You can see that he's not a spring chicken. He's an elder fellow. He's holding a skull, and he's peering directly at it. And the bottom half of his body has been transformed into that. He's wearing a bear skin, but suddenly, instead of it just being a skin, he has the bear's legs. The bottom part of his body is the bear. It's a Native American approach to, and a more shamanistic or relative approach to the same thing we talk about in the resurrection image of the Christ, by facing death squarely. He looks like he's fearless, but this is the outcome. This isn't the process. Fearlessly facing the reality that things come and go has afforded him the capacity to transform and utilize all the forces of nature. They're his when he needs them. The bear in Native American traditions often symbolizes both a kind of fierceness, but also that which protects us. It's protection. I'm also wearing a bolo tie with a bear on it this morning. I brought a little Sedona out of my closet this morning. So this is like jumping to the absolute reality by facing squarely and allowing what is to be. All manner of new possibilities and potentials become ours. They emerge and become ours. But again, a part of what I'm attempting to communicate this morning has to do with honoring process. We are in a process here. If you were looking at the details of this church as I'm looking at them every day, you'd know we're in a process. There is a need for, and there is for new structure, and new structure is emerging about as fast. It's like with blinding speed, things are coming together. But we have a ways to go. It's not all together yet. And that's more my job. You don't need to know the details of that, just what you pay me for. Mine, your boards, and a few individuals that are working at the inner level to provide, render under Caesar, the worldly structure for the infinite light to be able to shine steadily, so that we're not always dealing with a bunch of details down here that are not in order and not in place and not clear. That has to be honored. We're putting it in place. So there's a process going on, and a part of me would like it all to be over yesterday and have all that be in place. I had those things in place in Sedona, and I didn't have to think about them anymore. But we'll be a while. Maybe it'll be 2 or 3 months or 6 months. I don't know. But this is the new earth. This is not going to be, I'm not imagining we'll be like Sedona. Or, Sedona's kind of a spiritual carnival. I hope we're not like Sedona. We're already more, there's more humility and a more practical and a simple goodness. Everybody that walks through the door doesn't announce to me here that they're a spiritual teacher that I should, look up to. Which is how I smilingly watched it happen in Sedona. I'm sure you're wonderful at what you do. This process we're doing a series of 5, and we're in the middle of this series too. So I'm really wanting to talk to you about honoring process. The amazing thing about the way grace works is if we don't resist the process, it does unfold more rapidly. It's when we don't want it to be this way, we want it to be already that way, that we cause, I think it was Werner Erhard who first said, resistance creates persistence. So if we resist this part now, where we are now, then we cause the process to be more lengthy, more difficult. We want to let the process unfold. We want to be present out of the still, silent dimension, be present to this. And I'm just confessing, part of me is like, and I can see that happening in me, and I know it isn't going to be fruitful if I let that be where I predominantly come from. Fortunately, in the years of awakening, I've learned to let that be okay too in me and not make that wrong, because that's my transformation. You see, I didn't come here just because I've already got it together. And, there may be some gifts that flow through me, some awarenesses, some understandings, and a wealth of experience at making mistakes, which is what qualifies you for this job. There's a story about a guy that comes to a spiritual community, and it's a community where enlightenment traditions are taught, and he awaits his audience with the master of the community, and he finally has it, and he sits down with him, and he asks the master, he says, if I do everything you teach here, all the meditation and the practices, he says, how long will it take me to reach enlightenment? And the master says, 10 years. So the fellow asks, he says, well, what if I meditate twice as long and double up on my spiritual practice? The master says, 20 years. He says, well, that doesn't seem fair. If I work twice as hard and it takes twice as long. And the master says, upon reflection, I now think in your case it'll be 30 years. Of course, in some traditions, the job of the master is to sort of knock the egoic movement out of the way as quickly as possible. And in reality, he may have been increasing the chance for a fuller awakening in the student by disappointing the little me that wants to hurry up and get there, get that spiritual child out of the field, because that's not the one that can understand this. I also brought in this morning a piece out of Zorba the Greek that I thought I would share with you. If God graced me, I put the marker in the right place. I did. Most of you know the story of Zorba. There's the spiritualized intellectual, and then there's Zorba, who just lives life. And there's an evolution of the spiritualized intellectual in the story, where he comes to recognize that Zorba, who basically just lives life, is more deeply spiritual than he is. And at one point he tells this story. He says, I dressed and went down to the water's edge. I walked quickly. I was gay, as if I had escaped from a danger or a sin. My indiscreet desire of that morning to pry into and know the future before it was born suddenly appeared to me a sacrilege. I remembered one morning when I discovered a cocoon in the bark of a tree, just as the butterfly was making a hole in its case and preparing to come out. I waited a while, but it was too long appearing, and I was impatient. I bent over it and breathed on it to warm it. I warmed it as quickly as I could, and the miracle began to happen before my eyes, faster than life. The case opened, the butterfly started slowly crawling out, and I shall never forget my horror when I saw how its wings were folded back and crumpled. The wretched butterfly tried with its whole trembling body to unfold them. Bending over it, I tried to help it with my breath. In vain. It needed to have been hatched out patiently, and the unfolding of the wings should have been a gradual process in the sun. Now it was too late. My breath had forced the butterfly to appear all crumpled before its time. It struggled desperately, and a few seconds later died in the palm of my hand. That little body is, I do believe, the greatest weight I have in my conscience, for I realize today that it is a mortal sin to violate the great laws of nature. We should not hurry. We should not be impatient, but we should confidently obey the eternal rhythm. So this is the nature of love. It's not to control life, to hurry life, to make life be as we want it to be. It is to allow life and to trust life and know that life's design is better than the one our limited vision can see. I said Wednesday night, and I will reiterate, that all of today's really helpful psychotherapeutic models were sort of reborn. They were known back in Egypt. The heart was known at that time to be the essence of what we call the healing presence. But in the 50s, Carl Rogers gave birth to humanistic and transpersonal psychological processes, all based upon the capacity to be with the one we serve in what he called an unconditional regard, which is really just letting someone be as they are. It seems so backward to our westernized minds that want to fix everything. And don't get me wrong, there's some fixers around me in this church that I'm very grateful for. I'm not saying we shouldn't do our best to fix, but that fixing, a lot of it is done for us by trusting, by allowing. Love greets first what is as it is without judgment. This is how we find our true selves in transition. I don't know what your life circumstance may look like. It may be more than you can bear to hear somebody say to you, consider letting it be as it is for this moment, but if only for this moment, because this is where the power flows into the world of time and circumstance, out of this eternal, now, still, silent moment. This is how our whole movement was built. So perhaps we can sort of join hands in this new birth. Perhaps all of us can set aside what we think Unity of Birmingham should be, or even what our personal lives are now about to look like. And we could open up into a greater grace, a greater ability to allow something from far beyond all of us to show us what it's trying to do in the natural rhythm of our transitions. I do not think we can possibly hope that transitions will stop. I think we can count on them becoming increasingly accelerated, even more profound. I believe we live in the time of the new earth. And I suspect it will heal our little wounded feelings. And I say little because in the conceptual framework of our being waves in an infinite ocean, as a wave, our issues can't be that deep. They feel overwhelming. They look profound. However, in relation to the infinite, the mind has to be stunned, because the mind can't even think the word infinite and get any kind of comprehensive framework around that. It has to just be a word that points into that which is unthinkable. So that's the power that we live in. Oh, I don't know either. What's up? I don't know either. But I'm inspired to speak in this way to you, to say, let's see if we can learn to let it unfold. Do not imagine, I mean, I have people come to me all the time saying, what can I do to help? What can I do to, well, you can still come and help. There are obvious things that can stand fixing. Yes, that I'm not trying to slow that down or stop that. I'm not talking about not acting. I'm talking about learning to let our actions flow out of this sense of a deeper dimension. I'm guessing there's no one in this room that hasn't been touched by something that was so beyond what can be conceived that you have today no good description for it. When you try to tell the story, you still will find yourself at a loss of words. When we are touched by this power, we may eventually reduce it to words so that we can talk about it, but it's always something beyond what we really have words to describe. Because it can't be circumscribed. It can't be really contained in a concept. It comes from the field that is the source of everything. That's the one. May we be rendered speechless. And may we be rendered thoughtless by this power. May our jaws drop in wonderment as we watch grace emerge. And as it wants to take form, we know it will take what we call the form of a divine idea. It will say, this is what I want you to do next. All transitional times are like that. If we can accept the ending and bear the void, the wilderness, whatever we want to call that, then the new emerges. Sometimes it's a good idea to ask a question or two, like, just exactly what would I be doing if money were not an object? If I died tomorrow, what would in my dying breath I regret I left undone and unsaid? Questions like that. Those are the ones that create an opening in us for the divine to emerge and speak to us from within us. We don't need another great guru on earth. We need to realize that we are the source ourselves. To me, the true teacher is the one who wants to liberate you from any need for him or herself, who wants to just watch you shine in freedom and strength and a power that flows from within you. Christ in you, your hope of glory, your promise of joy, liberation, and a light power that just occurs so readily and easily and so consistently that we don't even have to call it special anymore.